On the Crested Butte is Home podcast this week, my guest is me. We actually recorded this several months ago, but I guess I was just more interested in other people's stories than my own, so it's taken this long for me to edit this one up and get it out. So if you've wondered about me and my story, Frank Konsella, here you go, and let's get on to the interview. Today on the Crested Butte is Home podcast, my guest is me. Quite a few guests have told me that they thought it'd be fun if I was interviewed, so we're going to go ahead and do that. My wife, Brittany, will be interviewing me, and so Brittany, go ahead and take it away.
Well, thanks for having me on your podcast. This is kind of weird because you and I have been interviewed for a number of different podcasts before, but I haven't actually been the interviewer. So, you know, I get to talk to you and ask you all sorts of questions that you may or may not want to answer.
That's true. Yep. Role reversal. Here we go.
The other interesting thing is that Frank hasn't mentioned me a whole lot on the podcast, but he is married, and I do exist, and we actually do a lot of things together. Some people think we're attached at the hip, but, you know, you wouldn't know that from the podcast, but, you know, we do actually have a lot of fun together.
Sorry, point taken. Talk about Brittany more.
But this podcast is about you. So, why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
Yeah, so Frank Konsella, and I grew up in Golden, Colorado, and I went to the University of Colorado and graduated there in December 96 and promptly moved to Crested Butte, and I have been here more or less ever since.
And what made you move to Crested Butte?
Well, so the first time that I visited Crested Butte would have been spring break of my freshman year of college. Even though I grew up ski racing and things like that in Golden, for whatever reason I never made it down to Crested Butte. I skied Winter Park and Vail and Summit and all those other areas and had lots of races there, but never made it down to Crested Butte. And like I said, during that spring break, some friends and I, we were looking for something fairly cheap and easy to do. You know, we weren't going to Padre or Cancun or any of that stuff, so the time, and they've had it since too, but I think it was roughly $50 to stay at one of the motels in Gunnison, and then you also got a day ticket at either Crested Butte or Monarch. So that was the first time I skied Crested Butte, was during that, and we drove down to Gunnison, and it was a really big year. This would have been 92, 93, which is a really, really big snow year, and we came up, and I remember going around that corner and seeing the mountain for the first time, and it looks so unlike Winter Park or Summit or any of those, because of the peak, and the, you know, Banana was open, and there were already people skiing down it, and we were like, oh my gosh, this place is crazy, look at all that. So that was my first trip to Crested Butte.
So you grew up ski racing, and where did you train for the ski racing? Yeah,
I was Winter Park Comp Center is where I grew up ski racing.
And so how do you think Crested Butte differs from Winter Park?
Well, Winter Park will always have a special place in my heart, but as far as steep terrain goes, it's fairly limited at Winter Park. And that's really what I came to love about skiing. Once I stopped racing, I was just into kind of steeper terrain, and there's certainly some at Winter Park, as much as any other of the resorts on the Front Range, but it can't quite compare to what we have here at Crested Butte.
So, as you began to ski here in Crested Butte, you started to compete in big mountain competitions. So, tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, I guess I could kind of come back to that first story. So that was spring break of my freshman year, and then not long after that, I got to see the Extreme Skiing Championships, as they were then known, on ESPN. I think it played at like 3 in the morning on ESPN2 or whatever, you know, but you could set your VHS, and that's just to date it, because that's a long time ago. But anyway, you'd set your recorder and you could watch it, and again, that year was like this huge year, and they did all this cool stuff, and they actually, the finals was off the peak, they skied the Hall of Fame, and it was just this great storytelling of this event. And
tell us more about the Hall of Fame, because most people don't even know what that is.
Sure, good point. So Hall of Fame is what's above Banana, which is the main chute that comes right under the peak, that's kind of this intimidating cool looking feature.
And is that normally skiable, or how do people normally access that?
Yeah, the Hall of Fame is never open to the public. It's sometimes fairly thin, so not every year would it be open from the top. So that was kind of a rare thing. And like I said, they were busting out these ropes and they were getting all this great footage. So, between my first visit here and that footage, I was just like, man, that Crested Butte place that's really cool down there. I want to spend some time down there. So the following year, what should have been my sophomore year at CU, I actually took the year off. I just needed a break from college, and so I moved down here for just that winter, and that was the first competition that I did was that winter.
So tell us more about the comps that followed. Like, where did they take you to, and how many did you do in Crested Butte?
Sure. So, like I said, I did that one in, that would have been 93, 94, and I did okay, but, and then did some more when I moved here in 96, and the first couple, they were okay, and some stories with those, but, I guess it would have been the 99 year, maybe. It was the first year that I did really well, and so I got fifth place. Well? I got fifth place that year, which is awesome, because I won some money, and back then they had just all these swag items. I had this mini TV. It was the most random gift ever, but but that's how that year went. And then from there, I kept doing them. So overall, I did the Crested Butte event 10 different times. I was top 10 5 of those 10 years, top 5 a bunch of those times. And at first, really the only events were the ones in Crested Butte and Valdez, Alaska. And then it started to grow, and there were more. So I did events in Kirkwood out in California, or Whistler, Red Mountain, which is a resort that I actually spent a winter in interior BC. Berthoud Pass, when they still had the lifts turning there, they had an event. A few other places, and did pretty well at those. I got 5th up at Red Mountain as well. I think I was 20th at Whistler. I was 15th at Kirkwood. So had some pretty good showings in a lot of events over the years, I guess. But never quite won one either, I guess.
So do you remember your last big mountain comp?
I do, and I keep trying to remember what year that was, though I don't remember. Maybe it was 08.
I think it was 08.
Yeah.
And what happened?
Well, it went really well. We got to do, I was in the top again, and they had the event that year in an area called Big Hourglass / Bermuda Triangle, which is this permanent closure between Third Bowl, Phoenix Bowl, and that's always really fun to ski there because it's kind of forbidden fruit, it's not open, and also it's just awesome terrain. And so had a really good first run, and on the very last cliff I took a knee to my cheek, and even though I stuck the landing and whatever and skied out and the judges didn't know that anything happened, I had actually broken my orbital bone, which is the bone around your eye, and so I was kind of starting to swell up a little bit, and I could feel this crunchiness if I tried to move my nose or blow my nose or anything like that. And then they did a super finals run, which was only for the top 10 people, and I really wanted to ski again, and I really wanted to just prove myself again, even though at that point I was practically one eye. So I did ski it again and just kind of had a mediocre run, so I ended up in 9th that year, but I was the only local at that point who was still skiing, so I was the top local that year, so I guess that's as close as I'll ever get to winning. I got to have top local status for at least one event. So
that event ended up taking you to the hospital.
It did, yeah. After finishing that last run, I went down to the hospital and they did the CAT scan or whatever, and it was kind of crazy because they beam it to the other side of the world in Australia for some guy to look at it because they don't have a technician in Gunnison that can look at it, and came back and they're like, yeah, you broke your orbital bone. Don't blow your nose for, I can't remember, was it 4 weeks?
6 weeks.
Yeah, I was going to say it was 6 weeks.
They said not to blow your nose for 6 weeks.
So I didn't
Who does that?
I didn't get to blow my nose for 6 weeks, and that was not fun at all. But no surgery or anything like that. So
what did they say would happen if you blew your nose?
Apparently, the mucus could get into your eye and get infected and stuff.
Gross.
So, yeah.
Glad you didn't lose your eye.
Yeah, me too.
All right, so going back to some other things. Back in the day, you used to live in more or less a ski bum house, which you guys dubbed Chi Beta. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it was just, one of those houses that ski bum after ski bum live in, and we just kind of thought it was funny because there were a bunch of good skiers in that house. There was Jack Hannon, who has since passed away, but he won the event, and Carrie Jo lived there for a while. She's someone that I interviewed on the podcast earlier, and she won a bunch of events, and her boyfriend, now husband, Gary Hicks, lived there, and he won the event, and Ben Farimsky, who's a really good skier, and Jeff Berman, who's a really good skier, and we found out from the neighbor later that Bill Johnson, who, won a gold medal, obviously, in the Olympics, he apparently lived there long before we did, supposedly. I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway, so we just thought it was funny that we were a skiing frat house, is what we called it, and had a lot of fun times there. And
did you have to do anything particular to be part of the frat house?
No, not really. We kind of
no hazing.
There really wasn't hazing, but sometimes we would haze people anyway. But it wasn't really required.
Who was kind of the leader of Chi Beta?
I'd have to say it was Ben Farimsky.
And you also interviewed him on the podcast, right?
Yep. He was on one of the early ones as well.
So you must have worked at some point when you first moved to Crested Butte. And it wasn't as a realtor, I know that. So tell us about some of your first kind of ski bum jobs here.
Well, that first winter that I talked about, that would have been my sophomore year of college, I worked at, I was a busser at the Roaring Elk, which is now 9380, but at the time it was the Roaring Elk, and then there was a bar side of it called the Dugout. I'm sure some people remember it. It was a really cool spot there in the Elevation Hotel. And then when I came back after graduating from CU, they had given me the job to manage the Twister warming house at night when they used to do fondue dinners there. So guests would load up what was then the Keystone chairlift and now the Red Lady chairlift, and they would ski down to Twister, and they'd have this all-you-could-eat 3-course fondue dinner, and then ski back down at the end of the day with a torchlight parade. And so that was a super fun job. I could ski basically till 3 o'clock, and that's when I'd start setting up the tables and getting ready for people, and that was a really fun job for a while.
I seem to remember a story about a snowmobile during that job.
Yeah, we're not going to... Oh, wow, we're going to talk about the snowmobile thing?
Yes.
Oh, boy. Yeah, you said you were going to be hard on this. Yeah, so it was the very last one of the year, and I had a buddy visiting from Jackson, and he was always getting into trouble. And at a certain point, we decided that some people should come back up and have like a little end-of-the-year type party, and up at Twister, and there were always patrollers there in case someone had a medical issue or anything, so they brought one of the the patroller was just like, oh, just use the snowmobile, it's fine, just put it back at the end of the night, which was really nice of them and kind of crazy too. But so as we were hanging out, someone got the bright idea to fire up the snowmobile and do a quick little circle, and then that was no big deal. But then this buddy of mine from Jackson, he went up, and he went way higher than he should have, way up by the patrol shack, and he tried to make that corner that's by the patrol shack, and he did not make that corner, and so basically his snowmobile kind of went off of the cat road, which is above what everyone calls Westwall, or above the on really steep terrain. So it went off that, and it just T-boned into a tree, and he was up there. Meanwhile, we're like hanging out at Twister, and we're like, man, he's been gone for a while. So we like walked all the way up and following his track, and we see it, and we see where it goes. And I'm like, oh man. So we had to find some rope and tie it to the snowmobile and wrap it around these trees and basically rappel it down to the lower Cat Road, which is above Westwall, and thankfully
below Westwall.
Well, no, we were above Westwall, and that those steep trees above Westwall, and so we could. Thankfully, the snowmobile still worked. We parked it where the patroller told us to. We found him the next day. We explained what happened, and he said, "That's hilarious. Don't worry about it. The snowmakers do far worse in the early season," and that was the end of that.
Was that your first time riding a snowmobile?
No, I remember riding a snowmobile at a ski race when I was a kid. We stayed at a place like south of Breckenridge, and there was this kid there that had a snowmobile, and we rode it around like this hotel a bunch of times at Blue River, or whatever that town is called. Yeah.
And what do you think about snowmobiles now?
Oh, snowmobiles are awesome. They're a great way to access the backcountry. They're fun on their own, and yeah, I like my snowmobile. I'm a fan. And I didn't crash it. My buddy from Jackson did, anyway.
Well, we've all done plenty of crashing with snowmobiles, so let's not, let's not point fingers.
Yeah, I could point fingers right back at you, so.
So Twister, you keep saying the word Twister, but Twister doesn't really exist anymore. What is it?
Right, so now it's called Ulis. And of course the Twister lift, which is right next to it, that's no longer running, but hopefully maybe someday it will again.
All right, so now we're going to get into the nitty gritty. We're just getting started.
I thought we were already in the nitty gritty.
I already dug out some dirt, but there's more. You ready?
Okay.
So describe how we first met.
Okay. Well, you and I met because I had skied a 14er, which is a 14,000-foot peak in Colorado, called Pyramid Peak, down this line called the Landry Line. And when we did it, that was a pretty early descent of it. It was me, Pete Sauer, John Jasper, Jeremy Wagner, and Sean Crossan, who's also been on the podcast. But it was a pretty early descent, and then when we were done, Lou Dawson of wildsnow.com, he thought that was really cool, so he met us afterwards when we were having dinner and whatever in Basalt, and he took our photo, and that photo ended up on Wild Snow. So that was one way that you saw me, and then the other way was this website called TetonGravity.com, the forums there, and same
TetonGravityResearch.com.
Yeah, I had said something about it, like, oh yeah, we skied the Landry Line, pretty stoked, or something like that, and between those two things, you kind of basically tracked me down.
I cyberstalked you.
You did, exactly, because you didn't tell me at the time, but you were formulating a plan to want to ski all the 14ers, and you were looking for partners, so that's why we met, and we did end up skiing all the 14ers together.
That's true. We did. So, tell us more about skiing Pyramid Peak. What's that like, and who are your partners? Like, I mean, you described their names, but, like, who are they?
Pyramid's just this beautiful peak from Aspen, and it's super steep, and it was skied by this beautiful line called the Landry Line by Chris Landry. I think that was 1980, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's 1983, I thought.
It's right around there. 1980 plus or minus 4 years, we'll call it, anyway. But, and it hadn't been skied again until 2006, which is the year that we're talking about now.
By who?
Well, I guess the second descent would have been Chris Davenport. And
so you guys were the third descent, right?
Yeah.
The third known descent, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I had a history with that mountain. I had actually skied a line near there, too. But no, it's this aesthetic line. It's over 4,000 feet, which is giant for Colorado. And it's really, really steep, up at the top. It might be pushing 50 or something, maybe even more, and a handful of turns. And then it stays in the upper 40s, and even the bottom is 40 plus. It's pretty rare thing for Colorado to have that kind of sustained steep pitch. So it remains my favorite ski line that I've ever done in Colorado, and really in just about anywhere too. And I've been lucky enough to ski in a lot of places.
I can second that. Okay, so tell us more about your 14er skiing project. You met me, I grabbed you as a partner, but you first told me that you didn't want to ski all of Colorado's 14ers.
Sure. Well, then I guess we could back up a little bit. I mean, I was always really into mountaineering when I was a kid. So I had made it a goal to climb all the 14ers, because that's what you do in Colorado. If you lived in Washington, you'd probably want to climb Rainier, but in Colorado you climb all the 14ers. There's 54 peaks over 14,000 feet. So one summer, I remember in high school, I did 16 of them in one summer when I could first learn to drive. And I was able to finish that before I was through with college, which was a goal of mine. And so I'd already been up to the top of all the 14ers, and I knew what they were about. And as I got into backcountry skiing, I enjoyed them, but I was enjoying the ones that were fun to ski. So I had skied Sneffels, which you can see from Montrose as you're headed south towards Lake Telluride. It's that beautiful peak there. I'd skied one of the Maroon Bells. I'd skied Pyramid. I'd skied Grayson Torreys just because they were really close to where I grew up. And some other ones, but as far as going back to ski, say, Bross or Sherman, I was maybe not that enthusiastic about, because those are just kind of these giant hills. But you and I started skiing them together, and as we did, all of a sudden the numbers just keep ticking up. And next
so you're
thing you know,
saying that we skied the...
We didn't ski the crap. We skied lots of ones together. Some were good and some were not. But the point is, we got to the point where all of a sudden, oh, there's 20 skied, and now there's 27 skied. Whoa, halfway there. And it was probably about that halfway point, I guess, when I was like, hold on, I'm definitely skiing all the 14ers too. So I did.
So if you were to do the 14er skiing project again, how would you do it differently?
Well, I thought we did a pretty good job, actually.
How so?
Well, you hear about a lot of people who are in such a rush and they end up skiing them in poor conditions, or they ski a line that's maybe not like the best and most aesthetic line, but they kind of piece it together just because they want to get it done, kind of thing. And I mean, I think for the most part, when I look back on all the routes and the conditions, largely it was a lot of really good conditions. So in that way, I'd probably do it the same. I might take even longer and wait for even more perfect conditions, but I certainly wouldn't want to do it faster, because in general, the faster you do it, the more you're just going to kind of be like, there was kind of snow, and just do it. But
I mean, most people don't really know how long it took you. So how long did it take you to ski Colorado's 14ers? Well,
like I said, I had done, a handful before you and I met and started skiing some of the others, so I'd done a half a dozen or whatever, but the bulk of them really were just in the next 2 years, and then I think the last year I only had maybe 6 or something to do that very last spring too, so we kind of cranked them out there for a couple of years.
Yeah, I remember one year we did 27.
There you go.
Yeah. How has skiing the 14ers changed over the last decade? What would make somebody who wants to do this project, what would make it different from them than what we did?
Well, I guess I'd start off and say that what we did was far different than what Lou Dawson did, and he was the first person to ski all of them, and when he was doing it, there was pretty limited internet. The weather forecasts were not like they are now, when you can get really good, detailed information for specific peaks. The SnowTel sites that are these automated sites that show how much snow falls in a lot of places, those weren't really all that available, so it was kind of a crapshoot for him coming from Aspen down to, say, the Sangre de Cristos, whether or not there was even any snow. And it just was a much harder thing for information to get around. When we were doing it there in the mid-2000s, that change had just kind of started, and there were a lot more people doing it, and all these other, like I said, weather.gov was this huge thing, and SnowTel and all these other things, and we were just all of a sudden this information was exploding, and so it was quite a bit easier for us, and that's just continued exponentially. And so now today you can search Instagram for a specific peak and you'd see if anybody did it, and there's all these other websites, and there's all these old trip reports for the last 15 years of people who have skied it, and you can go back and you can look at all their photos and you can just follow the whole thing and really have a good idea before you leave of what you're getting yourself into. So, and that won't stop. I mean, there's videos even easier to do. There's Facebook Live. Someone could do a descent live from Pyramid at this point. So how did a lofty goal like skiing the 14ers help you evolve as a skier and as a person? Yeah, that was a big goal, and I guess I've never been a huge goal person. At the end of the day, it was probably more your goal than mine, but
I'm a big goal person.
Yes, you are, and they're great. I think I've realized since then that the goals can really push you and make you do some things that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise, and feeling a satisfaction when you're done with a big goal like that is it's pretty big. So I think that's the main thing of just being able to look back on that was big. As far as how it changed my skiing, I think it's much more on the mountaineering side, on the climbing side, because that's my weak point. The skiing always felt really good and fun and comfortable. The climbing would sometimes challenge me a lot more than the skiing ever did.
Did it change your perspective on how you look at a mountain? When you approach it as a skier?
No, I don't think so. I think I always was kind of looking at the peaks around here and figuring out what a cool, steep, fun line would be. Even before doing the 14ers, I was always drawn to the aesthetics of a mountain and where I could go and what I could do.
So you and I ended up skiing a really cool line on El Diente. You should talk more about that.
Sure. That was certainly an awesome line. I did ski it actually without you the first time, and I followed the same line that Davenport and some other people skied, which was this just crazy exposed traverse off of the summit, and then towards the more standard summer route. It was a fun line for sure, but then when you and I went back to do it, that wasn't in, and we were trying to figure some other stuff out, and a good friend of ours, Jarrett Luttrell, who lives down in Silverton, but lived in the Gunnison area at the time,
And he was a snowboarder.
He's a snowboarder, the first person to snowboard all of the 14ers too, and just a general all-around badass, and he had kind of pioneered this new route that... Solo, which you could see bits and pieces of, and it just kind of like it went from one couloir, and then to this other traverse, this other couloir, and then to a third couloir, and they all kind of linked up kind of improbably on the north line and north face of El Diente and the San Juans, and it was just, that's a really awesome line, and when he did it, obviously no one knew about it. We did it, I don't know who skied it in between us, but whatever the case, we did it, and we were like, oh man, that's just an awesome line, and at this point, that line it's even in a guidebook, so...
By Brian Miller and Ben Connors.
There you go.
So, when did you finish skiing all of Colorado's 14ers?
It was 2008, wasn't it?
It was. and how did you feel?
It was on my older brother's birthday, May 17th. That part I remember. No, and it was Mount Harvard, so it was a fairly easy one, which was good, so we didn't have to get all stressed out and scared over it, but on the one hand, it felt great. It was this goal that was done, and on the other hand, it was just kind of sad because there was nothing left to do, obviously you can still ski, but that goal was done. It's kind of like, maybe like the end of Lift Serve ski season is kind of a similar thing where, you and I will just keep skiing in the backcountry, but at the same time, there's something that's done, and you can't just go back the next day and get on the chairlift and go ski. So it's kind of a similar, like, I don't know, good thing, bad thing.
So what other ski goals have evolved from there?
Well, I think we just mentioned it, like our guidebook was probably the next big thing that came about, and that was when the Mountaineers, which is a big outdoor publishing company up in Washington, approached us because of our website, 14erskiers.com, and they wanted someone to write a guidebook in Colorado, and they already had a series, so there was Oregon and Washington that were already done, and there were about 100 routes in those books, so we knew that was about what we would need to do, so that was a huge goal, to just drive around all of Colorado and come up with 100 different routes all throughout the state that didn't have to be 14ers, just whatever, and so that took us 2 years to do the research and another year to do all the writing and editing and everything else, and it's out now. And
when did it get released?
That was just a year and a half ago, basically, so 2018, fall of 2018 is when it's out, yeah. And
what were some of the coolest things about doing that project?
The thing with that project is that there were no constraints, obviously, on the 14ers. It just needed to be a peak that's 14,000 feet high, whereas this, we were able to go into some mountain ranges that don't have any 14ers. We were able to go just do some random things and also go back and do some routes that we saw when we were skiing the 14ers too, that we were like, oh man, we should come back and do that. And for this book, we definitely came back and skied some really fun routes that we had seen while skiing the 14ers. So
I thought it was also really cool because we got to ski things that weren't in ranges with 14ers, like the Gore range and the Flat Tops range.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Yeah.
So that was fun. How do goals like this change you as a person? How do they make you evolve?
I'm not sure. I think mostly it gives you extra confidence. I think it's just a confidence booster to know that you can set out to do something and accomplish it. And that goes into all phases of life. When I started real estate, for instance, confidence is a problem for a new real estate agent. It's hard to meet somebody and feel like you're confident, but for me, just I knew I could do it because I'd done other things that were difficult in life. So
cool. So you went from a ski bum to a real estate agent.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that progression.
Sure. Well, yeah. I just kind of started to get into it. This was several years ago, and first and foremost, I should say that my dad was a real estate agent, so I was very familiar with real estate. I can remember going to ski races. I remember going to a ski race in Angel Fire, and he's like, oh, we're going to go look at this property. And of course, it's because he wanted to write off a boatload of miles for tax season. But So I was used to real estate and knew about it, and my brother, that's also what he does in the Denver area. My sister-in-law has also got into it with him in the Denver area, so real estate is, I guess, the family profession. And so I just wasn't ready, I don't think, to do it earlier because it is a bigger time commitment. It's harder to just go out and do a ski comp or something like that when you're doing real estate. But I was ready for it a few years ago and finally got into it, and it's gone really well, and I really enjoy doing it now, so it's good. And I'm glad to no longer be working in construction, which we didn't really get into, but I did that for 15 years between being fondue Frank and being in real estate.
Frank the drywaller.
Yes.
No more.
No more.
So how would you describe yourself as a real estate agent?
Well, I think there's a few different things that I'd like to think that I'm pretty good at. One is that I'm just pretty calm. I'm pretty mellow. I don't think I've ever pushed any of my clients, and I have all these testimonials on my website, and they all kind of seem to say the same thing. Like, Frank wasn't pushy, and Frank kept in touch, and he was a good communicator. And so those are all things that I pride myself on. But then the other thing I really pride myself on is just how I go about getting my name out there, this podcast being one of them. I just like doing things that are a little bit different. So I have this really in-depth website that I'm not sure if anybody else really has anything quite like what I have. And this podcast is something quite different. I just prefer to do things a little bit differently sometimes, and it's worked out well, so that's what I'm going to keep doing.
And what's your website?
The website is CrestedButteRealEstateAgent.com, although you can also go to CrestedButtesHome.com like this podcast, and that gets you there too. So.
And what inspired you to do a podcast?
Well, I was just listening to a lot of podcasts. You were actually the one who first started to kind of get the podcast addict thing going, and we'd go on some of these trips to when we were writing the book and things like that, to go look at ski lines to potentially put in that guidebook, and Steamboat and Durango and all these other places, and we'd listen to podcasts, and I started to really enjoy it. Nobody really had a Crested Butte-based podcast, so that's why this exists.
So, going back to your career, what are some of the benefits of being a realtor? There
are a lot of benefits, but I think the biggest thing is just my clients, and I've just had so many cool clients, and they all end up being friends because they're just great people. And to help them, whether it's maybe they're buying their first home ever as a local, or maybe they're buying a second home here that's going to enable them to come up here and enjoy the hiking and the biking and the skiing and all the other things. Either way, it's a big life event for everyone that I work with, and it's just such a great thing to be able to help them with that, and that's probably the biggest thing.
So what are some of the challenges of being a realtor?
There are a lot of realtors here in Crested Butte, and a lot of really good realtors here in Crested Butte. So it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. You have to set yourself apart, and this is one of the ways that I choose to set myself apart. But that's the big one. And obviously, it's an interesting market, being a largely resort / second home market. It's just it's different than Denver or whatever city or suburb that most people are familiar with. So that has its perks and its challenges.
So you've lived in Crested Butte for over 25 years, right?
Well, yeah, that's always a difficult question when people ask me that, because like I said, so 93, 94, so just a winter, and then moved back in December 96. But then even then I spent the 2000-2001 season living in Roslyn, British Columbia, which is the ski area there is Red Mountain. And then the following year, 2001-2002, I lived in Whistler. So I'm not sure where to subtract and add each of those, but over 20 years for sure.
Well, regardless, you've been here a long time.
Yeah.
So you've seen a lot of changes happen. What are some of the changes that you've witnessed?
Yeah, and that's always a really hard question that people like to ask as well, because it happens so slowly when you're actually here. If I had left 20 years ago after one season and came back now, I'd probably be shocked. But when there's a new building here and a new little change there, it's hard to see it all at once. So, obviously there's just a lot more people here in general. There's a lot more people in Colorado, particularly. And so a lot of those folks from Denver, they get tired of I-70 and they come down here and they visit, and some of them even buy property. But that's just met more people on the weekends than there used to be. But at the same time, I look back, that first year I had in 93 and 94, Paradise chair was a double. The East River chair was a double. The Red Lady chair was a triple. So,
and they were all slow.
And they're all slow.
Not high speed.
Yeah. So when you look back at it, you're like, well, how was there not these huge lines? And we actually got a lot of skier visits back in those late 90s days. So, it just, things change and your perceptions of them change. So that's how it is. But yeah.
Do you think Crested Butte has long lines on weekends now?
No, honestly, a couple weekends a year, but half the time if people are complaining, it's because the maze is half full, and that's 6 minutes. If you think that's long, you should probably check out a Front Range resort on a weekend in February or something like that, and see what an actual long lift line looks like.
I totally agree. So Crested Butte is home for you. Why do you continue to choose to make this your home?
Well, it's like all these things we've talked about. I mean, I love the mountains. I love the things that I do in the mountains, which is mainly mountain biking, which we didn't really talk about. Maybe we'll do it again sometime. And skiing and backcountry skiing. And we live in this cool condo that we walk out 20 seconds and we get to click into our skis and go skiing.
And this year we have to walk down 2 stairs and then up the snow.
Right, because
and
we
duck.
So much snow.
We have to duck under our the awning that comes, out the door because there's so much snow. So you got to watch your head. It's a good thing we both wear helmets.
Yeah, exactly. And then, beyond that, I have all this just great group of friends that I've met mostly through skiing and mountain biking, and we all look out for each other. You hear that on all these podcasts when people ask this question, and the community is a super huge part of living here too. Again, I kind of keep pointing back at some of the other ski areas, maybe close to the Front Range, and I'd be surprised if there's kind of the same type of community in those places, just because they are bigger and more spread out. But we have that here, and we have this, and everybody's just really involved in the community and wants to see it grow in the best way possible, and look out for it and take all the good things and keep those going and make the things that could improve them. So, do
you think that's your favorite thing about Crested Butte?
Honestly, it's the mountains. Mountains one, community two.
Fair enough. So how do you think you make a difference in this community?
Wow. Well, hopefully this podcast is helpful for a lot of people. I think it highlights some of these amazing people that live here. That would maybe be one. I'd like to think that some of the backcountry skiing that you and I have done and that we let people know about maybe gets people excited about it. And the same thing, maybe even more so with mountain biking and hiking that we have on our 14erskiers.com website that maybe introduce people to some of the other trails that aren't as well known, or take people on a hiking trail that maybe they've never heard of. So I think those are all ways that you and I give back. You and I are part of a nonprofit called Share the Slate that's really important to both of us, because we believe in multiple use in the winter as far as recreation goes. We don't think that one user gets to have all the national forests to themselves. So I think that's really important, what we've done with that, and the app that we helped develop along with the Tourism Association, I think is a really cool thing that we've been able to give back to the community, that shows all the different types of recreation that you can do in winter and where it's allowed and where it's not, and so everyone can know what to expect.
So you mentioned a couple of these things, so Share the Slate and the app. Most people have no idea what you're talking about. Sure.
Well, like I said, so Share the Slate is a nonprofit organization that you and I started, and you can go to sharetheslate.org.
It's .com.
It's .com, thank you. And you can read about our mission there, and you can also read about the app that we helped develop there, but it's the CBG Trails app. So if you searched iPhone or on Android for CBG Trails, you would find that app, and it would have the summertime trails that we all hike and bike on, as well as all the wintertime fat biking and Nordic skiing and areas that are closed to snowmobiles, areas that are open to snowmobiles, and everything else that you can think of.
And where were we an integral part of this app?
I guess it was largely our idea, and we kind of spearheaded money raising for a big chunk of it, and once we kind of threw down our portion of that, that's when the TA was finally able to get behind it as well and finish the job too.
Well, just for the winter part, not the summer. The summer
Right.
already existed for a couple years.
Sure.
And then we decided the winter stuff needed to exist and was essential to our community. All right, so you've kind of said this already, but just to reiterate, in case people forgot, because, I don't know, I'm forgetful. People listening to this are probably forgetful, so where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, and of course that's always in the show notes for every single episode, but CrestedButteRealEstateAgent.com, that's all just one word. CrestedButteIsHome.com is the podcast, but it also goes to that same real estate website. 14erskiers.com, that's a 14ERSKIERS. ShareTheSlate.com that we just talked about. And those are all different ways of some of the things that we talked about.
You have a lot of websites.
I do. I do. That goes back to that thing where I kind of enjoy the website part of real estate rather than some of the other parts.
All right, so is there anything else that I should have asked you that I forgot? Because I'm forgetful, so you know.
No, I think we're good on this one.
I dug in just enough dirt. All right.
We talked about some things that I wasn't expecting, but
No, I
didn't really go into the fact that I lived in Canada, so we'll save that for maybe another
Well, this
one.
is about Crested Butte.
Yeah, but it's also about me and what I've done and where I've been.
Do you want to describe more about how you lived in Canada?
No, we'll save that for another one.
Perfect. And we'll save the mountain biking part for another one, too. But other than skiing and mountain biking, what else do you like to do?
Well, those are the big two, but like I mentioned, I hiked all the 14ers when I was younger. I like to say that I'm really into ice climbing, but I never get to go enough because skiing's generally too fun. I occasionally rock climb, but again, I'd rather probably mountain bike than that. Hockey, love hockey, love playing town league hockey.
What's town league hockey?
Town league hockey is just, it's Crested Butte town league hockey that, towns are developed, teams are developed every year, and they change constantly, and there's, usually 8 or so teams, and that's super, super fun. I've had a lot of good times playing with all my teammates in town league hockey.
How long have you played hockey?
I started that same year when I started skiing, so 3.
At the age of 3.
3 years old.
So that's a long time.
Yes, but I had to give it up when I was 13 or so because I was ski racing and playing hockey, and that was too much, so...
So you had to pick one.
Yes. Dad said pick, as often happens here in Crested Butte as well, because there's a lot of hockey players who don't ski and a lot of skiers who don't play hockey.
So you picked skiing.
I picked skiing.
Would you still pick skiing?
Oh, of course. But I love hockey. It might be second place. If I could play hockey instead of mountain bike, I probably would choose hockey over mountain biking.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
I learned something new today. Awesome.
Yep.
All right, so one final question. Who else should I interview? Well, and I guess that would really be you.
Yes. Who else should
hopefully
interview?
this is my last interview because, this is not my job.
Well, no, and I should interview you sometime. So that's been on the slate for a while. So we will just turn the tables here.
Fantastic. You guys will have to learn all the things about me.
Thanks for listening to the Crested Butte is Home podcast with me, Frank Konsella. At the end, you may have noticed that Brittany suggested that she should be interviewed, and of course, she actually already was. It's episode number 40. You can find that episode and all other episodes, plus real estate information at CrestedButteIsHome.com. And of course, you can find all the other episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast player, and you can subscribe there as well. So that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and I will see you again in a couple of weeks or so.